Welcome to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show, issue number 89.
Boom.
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
Hey, welcome everybody to the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show, issue 89, and it's been a long one. You know, these last few months we had shows, we had sickness, we had health scares, we had comic battles. I don't know what it's been, but we finally got this little shindig together that we can have our Christmas special, our last time of the year, and look at Niall all happy down there. So, Steve, first off, I love you. I want everybody to know, if this was going to be aired on the original time, Steve wouldn't have been here because he's feeling a little down and out. But luckily things got changed around and here he is. But before we get into Steve, Niall down below, the tech man extraordinaire, tell us what's up, brother. Oh, and we need Niall. We need Niall so bad.
Well, you know what, everyone? Welcome back. It's been a pleasure. And, look below, click that subscribe button, and smash that bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. And, speaking of tech, thankfully, the power supply on the studio computer kind of burned out because now we do have Steve here, which is why we had to reschedule this. But now everything is in motion.
That's what happened. That's why you got canceled.
That's why.
Because Steve, his computer, you know what happened in it? The Kree-Skrull War just destroyed everything.
Well, lucky enough, I know that Niall probably has a room with 60 brand new computers, each one and from different future eras, like Kang. So
shout out to Amazon. Shout out to Amazon in the Christmas season to get me my power supply on time, and we're up and rolling. This computer has never been shut off in, let's see, 2019. So what is that? Like, we're actually going on almost 6 years.
Really?
This computer has maybe been shut off, let's say 5 times. And I was working on the promo for this episode, and I went and I finished and I saved, and my kids were bugging me. I'm like, I'll just let me put them to bed. So I shut down the computer. Don't normally do that. I go to put it back on, it wouldn't turn on. Megged it out. It was the power supply. Yeah. And I'm like, John, I was pissed. I texted. I'm like, John.
Yeah, but little did you know, now the power supply to half the city went out too.
Yeah, right.
It's some big thing. But anyways, thanks for everybody for being here because this is our Christmas special. And when we do Christmas, of course, and the Marvel, we got the comic books. We like a little bit more of the lighthearted stuff. And obviously, a lot of that lighthearted stuff comes from one of the best kid-written comics of all time, Spidey Super Stories, which was an absolute classic. And when you go back to read that stuff today, it is still. I know Steve gets a little pissed that the Thanos got arrested and the Thanos copter came out of this too. Jim Starlin still has nightmares about that copter, but I don't care. But not just that, these two guests that we have too are so wonderful to have. But before we get into that, Steve, tell us what's going on with our guests and Spidey Super Stories and Christmas.
Well, the funny thing is, of course, it's always an honor to have Jeannie Thomas come along and give us some of these little rare nuggets of information that only she has access to. And it's the last time that we were online, it was quite educational. It was like, what? I've never heard of that before.
Yeah.
And I thought that I had read a billion interviews with a billion creators. So that's always fascinating. And of course, when I was a kid, I would look at the name Jim Salicrup, and I was like, God, these Yanks have the strangest names. Salicrup. What is that? It's not like in English. It's not like an English name. It doesn't make any sense. I was like, God, these Americans are weird. I wonder what he looks like. He must be some weird guy. And here we are.
You called
They're
that
pretty
one,
cool
Steve. You
people,
called
man.
that one.
We're fast forwarding all the way here, and then we're going to have him on the show. So it's absolutely amazing for me.
Yeah. And before we get into it, I just wanted to say we were talking before the show and all that stuff about a great Christmas gift, and I hope people I ran and got it. Just say we got the Marvel 2025 calendar that comes out too. But then obviously I hope anybody will try to go out there and get the Marvel calendar book. And why this is so significant too is Jim Salicrup. Obviously Roy started it, but Jim Salicrup, he wrote a lot into it this too, helping out Roy, and he wrote a whole bunch of the other ones, especially the Incredible Hulk one that I thought was one of my favorites and all that.
That's
But
cool.
this is a great
Beautiful.
tomb of all the everything, and just the bursting with colors,
Oh, wow.
bursting with themes. It makes the perfect Christmas gift for the Marvel fan and all of us that loves that classic stuff. So, without further ado, let's bring out the princess and the jester. Definitely the jester and a Stan Lee staple. So regardless, Stan Lee always there was Roy and there was a few others, but Salicrup was right in there too, and that was always so there was some belief in this guy, and he was and let's just say like uncredited co-creator of Venom, because I'm going to always throw that out there because he definitely is. So let's get him out here. Without a doubt, we're going to get Gene Thomas and Jim Salicrup.
Thank you, guys.
Yay. Thank you so much for being here on this Christmas episode. I know there was a lot of bumps to get this done, and thank you guys for being supportive to be on this, because it's the last one of the year, and who better to have Jim and Jeannie Thomas and doing the beautiful, wonderful stories of Spidey Super Stories and stuff. And what's ironic here, usually Jim is put on these type of projects, but Gene, you were the first one to I think the first 15 or 13 issues?
At least 15. Yes, 15.
My God.
The first issues.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, that's crazy. So Jeannie, first off, thank you guys for being here, obviously. Going back to Spidey Super Stories and stuff, I know were you already doing Night Nurse prior to that?
That is a good question. As 50 years have gone by, so I'm a little confused as to what was done when. But what I have to say is one of the reasons I was put on Spidey Super Stories and loved it so much is I had recently graduated from college, Hunter College here in New York, with a double major in psychology and elementary education.
Oh.
So I was like absolutely uniquely qualified to work with Children's Television Workshop.
Oh, yeah.
Which was very oriented toward reading education. And I was not really born to be a superhero person. So I kind of did the lighter things anyway. So it was a great fit.
Well, being married to Roy Thomas, you were going to get superheroes spilled all over you no matter what. There was no escape. I mean, with that, I mean, you had one of the best and greatest, especially the biggest editor of that time after, taking over the reins of Marvel, though. But I mean, it's funny how there's these synchronicities, how things sometimes become perfectly qualified to stuff. Like here you are with Roy, and then you're qualified for that, and then Roy throws that on you, and yet you can go with it. So even maybe not knowing like the continuity of Spider-Man, you could basically do anything with Spider-Man. Is that correct?
Well, one, he said he didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Give it to Jim Salicrup. They didn't want to touch it.
But it was a blend of very simplified Spider-Man stories, and then also comic book versions of Electric Company characters.
Right.
And so half the book might have been classic Spider-Man stories drilled down to a very elementary reading level and a very simplified art style. But then the other half of the book was an equal amount of Electric Company characters in their own freestanding stories. And those were based perhaps on Electric Company scripts or ideas from the Electric Company editorial staff. And there was always a big push for diversity, well before that was a term or well before that was a goal. But diversity among the characters, they tried not to overemphasize any one particular character, even though, say, someone like Easy Reader was far and away the most popular at that point, the most popular Electric Company character. He couldn't be overused. It would have been very easy to put Easy Reader in almost every story. Mm-hmm. But on the contrary, we had to balance out with some of the other characters, Jennifer of the Jungle, Pedro's Plant Place, just like this whole other array of Electric Company, Valerie the Librarian, Fargo, North Dakota.
Now, what's funny, if anybody out there doesn't know, Electric Company spawned Morgan Freeman. So that was a big deal, right?
He was Easy Reader, yes.
Yeah. I was just going to say that. Yeah,
the young Morgan Freeman, the young, cool Morgan Freeman in black leather jacket and jeans was Easy Reader.
Yeah, Easy Reader says this book is easy to read. And that was always on it. Go ahead, Steve.
You know, it's funny. When you look at the concept behind the Spidey Super Stories, you know, I would think that right now it's more applicable than ever. There's a gap right now in modern reading. Whereas, you know, of course, I don't think you should do it really in a comic. Maybe you should do it, you know, that they can read on their smartphones, you know, the kids. But, you know, today, especially in the southern states, you know, parents are, you know, they're very finicky about the material they're going to read. And some of the material that Marvel produced these days, or DC, you know, like a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old, someone's going to go to jail. So if we had the similar version of that, where we could start bridging this gap and say, okay, we have a kid, they've watched some cartoons, okay, they love the cartoon, whatever it is, and then they can read these simple stories, you know, stuff that's being allocated to them by their parents. And then once they get to a certain age, then they can move on to the, you know, the quote contemporary stuff today. I really do think that that's something that's missing today. And I think that was something that happened a long time ago. People don't realize what happened. You bridged this gap between kids that weren't quite ready to, you know, watch the Magus sucking the soul out of someone. Okay, but they could read, you know, a nice little issue where someone is bouncing around and a trash can falls over. You know what I mean? So I think right now that concept, I think, has a lot of weight, but I don't think it would work well in a comic. I think it would have to be, you know, something that would be on TikTok, something that would be in their kids' faces, you know, because this is where they are these days.
Well, maybe Jim wants to jump in here because Jim and I were on a panel at Comic-Con put together by Britton Payne of Nickelodeon. And he had started using Spidey Super Stories comics with his own son, who is neurodivergent, has reading issues, and actually brought together Jim, myself, and a speech language pathologist who works with the boy. And there was a lot of discussion about how this kind of very simple, clean artwork, short phrases, simple words, short sentences were very good for children with attention issues.
Yeah,
At the time, we weren't thinking of that. At the time, we were just going by a vocabulary list and what was then Electric Company's vocabulary requirement that no sentence be longer than 7 words.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, a little background. Years ago, there was, the very popular Sesame Street, produced by the Children's Television Workshop. And that was, sort of to first get children familiar with the alphabet and counting with numbers, etc. And that was so successful that the next logical step was, maybe we could help kids begin to learn how to read. And that's what the Electric Company, a spin-off show that they created, was all about. And Spider-Man actually appeared on the show.
Oh.
And it was a very clever routine they devised, that they created, where on the TV show, Spider-Man didn't actually speak. You couldn't hear him. Instead, he had word balloons pop up over his head. Yeah. So you had to read what he was saying to understand him. So the deal was, not only was Spidey Super Stories part of the Electric Company TV show, but Marvel would produce a companion comic book, again with the high-minded goal, aside from even diversity and everything else that can be attributed to it, the main goal was to teach children how to read, an entry-level reading comic. And to follow up on what Gene said, with Britton Payne, he was a comics fan when he was a child. So he was familiar with Spidey Super Stories and all the other comic books out there. And when he was a father and he had a son who was having these difficulties, he thought maybe comics could help. And he tried all sorts of different comics. And the thing with children is they're very sensitive to not wanting, no matter how old they are, they don't want to read something that they think is beneath them, intellectually. In other words, they don't want to look at baby stuff. So as Britton pointed out on that panel, a lot of the stuff even today for younger readers, younger fans on cartoons, for example, they'll do versions of the superheroes where they have these cartoony giant heads and little bodies, and it obviously looks a lot more juvenile than, say, the regular comics. The thing that Gene pointed out about Spidey Super Stories, it was simpler artwork, but Spider-Man was still drawn in the same proportions as he is in the regular comics. And over the years, I've also have met with lots of, say, high school teachers who are struggling with students who have a lot of difficulties reading. And the problem is the average comics, their vocabulary is too sophisticated. So that makes, if they try to get them to read those comics, it's just going to make the kids feel, like there's something wrong with them, that they're not smart enough to read these comics. And if they give them the simpler kiddie comics, well, then that's even more embarrassing to them. They want, and what they were hoping for, and they wound up almost describing Spidey Super Stories to me. If only there was a comic that looked like the other comics for older kids and adults that had simple dialogue and captions.
I'd have to say this. This is the genius of the quality of that comic back then. You had John Romita doing the covers.
Yeah.
But, I mean, like that, you can't get anything better.
And Jack Kirby a few times.
Yes, yes, and he inked over those. Yeah, and Romita inked over those. So what I'm saying is, you're getting that type of quality of artistry on that. That was, John Romita, I think, is the greatest comic artist of all time, in my opinion. But he was the face of Marvel, his style. So you had that on those covers. It gave it no less value than even the mainstream stuff that was going on, which made it unbelievable. Because that's what appealed to me. And even right behind you, Jim, you have that best of Spider-Man Super Stories, like that hardcover, Who's drawing that? Even I noticed
What a
that.
coincidence. How did that get there?
That's a tough one to get, too. And look at that cover.
And I put in the
Steve,
promo.
what do you think about the cover?
Ooh.
Give him the big
There we
head now.
Yep, there we go.
Yeah, look at that. Oh, I mean, you can't get anything better than that. Like when it comes to
Like the old style TV with the dial and
the tube TV. There you go.
I mean, so that's what I was thinking about that. Like it never lost any quality in the art and the visualization. So you could tell you guys took it seriously. And that's why the collectability, you don't see that in a lot of that. You see like the more kid, you know, like you just said, like the big head, the small little like cherub looking bodies and all that stuff. And I believe, and I don't know if you guys agree with this, there's no more universally beloved character than Spider-Man, because Superman, who isn't as famous anymore, you know, obviously he's a white guy, you know, you're gonna get a maybe an Asian guy or a black guy that's not gonna relate to him as much. And then you got Batman, same thing. But Spider-Man with that beautiful Steve Ditko costume, anybody could be Spider-Man. You could look at Spider-Man and he had that universal appeal. And it was perfect for Spidey Super Stories. And then I don't think people truly understand how revolutionary that comic was. And you guys being a part of that, especially Gene, you know, and Jim, like that was incredible, because even when I was a kid, I would have never looked at that stuff, but I loved the Spidey Super Stories because it looked so like I was collecting the Ramita stuff. So I'm just saying it never had that impression. I never thought low of that in any way. And plus I grew up with, that's how I got into Spider-Man was the Spidey 67 cartoon that was in syndication, and Spidey Super Stories. I mean, the Electric Company. And I waited and waited and waited for those store, like the guy in the suit with the word bubbles, and I used to whir, you know, it made those sounds. Yeah, it's so great. Go ahead now.
Well, it's funny that you guys are talking about Brighton, because when he reached out to me, it was Gene. Gene was the key to all of this. And it was
He
like,
is the key.
I had this message, and it was like, hey, I've been tracking, you know, I've been dealing with this thing and children on the spectrum and my child and whatnot, and we've discovered this miraculous thing with Spidey Super Stories. And, you know, I've been able to track down certain people. Some are deceased, but you have had contact with one. And
I'm not deceased.
No, and hopefully not for a long time. But they reached out, and I was like, yeah, you know, and it was funny because I reached out to John. I was like, hey, John, I just got this message. You know, we should, oh yeah, send it over, you know, and it's really cool because, you know, that happened, and then Terrificon happened, and I happened to be tabling next to Jim, and Jim's there, and, you know, a couple days before I text Jim, and I'm like, hey, Jim, this is going on as well. And, you know, it was really cool to hear that panel kicked off, and it was very successful because of what it is doing for, you know, childhood development, certain need developments and things. And what I wanted to ask you guys is, in my conversations with Brighton about this and whatnot, you know, there is kind of this urge to bring this series back and to focus on bringing those elements back. And has any of that been introduced to you guys, and maybe jumping back into some of these roles that you did, you know, many eons ago?
After you.
Crickets.
Ladies first.
Crickets. But I could see that any number of current people would just be given the same idea and able to run with it.
Well, but Jeannie, let me just say something on your behalf. People should understand this year was Jeannie's coming out year, because I'm going to just say she did her first podcast with us, which got her noticed for that panel, and she did her first CGC signing, which we're going to do next year again too. I'm just saying, like, so Jeannie, we're getting Jeannie back out there, because Jeannie was this hidden little relic that just didn't kind of stay.
A hidden gem that's starting to sparkle.
Yeah, it just kind of stinks, like you say. And I was like, no, we got to get Jeannie out there. And plus, with, you know, having the association with Roy and the Spidey Super Stories and Night Nurse and Werewolf by Night, I mean, you got a pretty good legacy there and stuff.
Well, I have to say, the Comic-Con was really terrific. I mean, having an excuse and a creative pass to get into the Comic-Con was just cherry on the sundae. I mean, it was an experience.
And Jim, you worked with Scholastics, right? You did that for a while, right? Was it you?
Kinda. No, I had my own company called Paper Cuts.
Yeah, and you did. Right, but and
Which
was
did
that
kid stuff?
okay? But was that something distributed? Did that have anything to do with Scholastics though?
They would distribute some of our books as well. Yeah.
Okay, and all that stuff. All right, I was wondering because Scholastics is still such a huge thing on how they get like the books and all that stuff to kids and all that stuff. You know, I mean, did they still? So how did you do that? Could they order it through Scholastics and then it got into schools, or how did that work?
Well, Paper Cuts is now my partner Terry Nantier and I created Paper Cuts as a kids graphic novel publisher, and right off the bat we were very successful. And a couple of years ago we sold it to Mad Cave Studios, which is continuing to be very successful. One of the things that I find amusing is that there's still very well-meaning, kind-hearted folks in the superhero comic biz that still think, oh, wouldn't it be nice if there were more comics for kids? And they don't really realize that the kids' graphic novel market is far bigger than the superhero comic book market.
Oh, yeah.
You know, something like Dog Man sells, 5 million copies per book. You know, the comics, they're lucky to break 20,000 copies these days. So, kids are still getting comics and they're having a lot of fun with them. And they always like comics. It's just that the standard everyday comic book these days is incredibly hard to find. You have to be near a comic book store. It's not available everywhere anymore. And B, they're quite expensive. $5 for one comic book is asking a lot for from anyone. So it's I think the kids' graphic novels are far more economical and more easily available. And when you mention Scholastic, they themselves are big publishers, very successful publishers of kids' graphic novels. They sell through schools, they sell through book fairs, and through both those outlets, they not only sell stuff they publish themselves, but they pick up stuff from other publishers. So they would often pick up titles that Paper Cuts was publishing. That's how we were dealing with them.
Yeah, I remember getting that little folder thing when they passed it out to the class when I was in grammar school, and you saw like the pull books and the pop-up books, and I was always crazy about like the little Spider-Man or the superheroes like activity books and all that stuff. Yeah, go ahead, Steve. What do you say to that?
So, Jim, I'm maybe the others are more aware, but I would like to know what comics you read before you became, like a professional. What was it that, you were at a newsstand or whatever it was? Something must have gripped you, something attracted to you. And what was it that, that you were like, oh man, I love this. I've got to read this. This is me.
I started with, before comics, the Dr. Seuss beginner books, the My Little Golden books, other, wonderfully illustrated children's books. So for me, I love the concept of words and pictures. And as you get a little older in schools, suddenly they want to wean you off those picture books and onto books that are, nothing but words. And I always love to draw. And to this day, I do my lousy sketches at comic conventions and have a lot of fun doing that. I'm sorry, like a lot of comic book writers or editors, I was a frustrated cartoonist. So, so when I stumbled upon comic books, it was words and pictures again. And so they were all interesting to me. I mean, keep in mind, it was possible to sort of read everything back in the 60s. Marvel, for example, I doubt if they came out with more than 5 books a week. Now it's like more like 30 to 40 titles a week, and they were only 12 cents, and they were all incredible. But it wasn't just Marvel. I was desperate for any comic book I could get my hands on. I would buy as much of the new stuff as I could afford, and I would, there was like a little shop in my neighborhood in the Bronx that would buy comic books from kids who maybe were outgrowing them. He'd spend the dealer would spend 2 cents to buy them from those kids, and he'd resell them for 5 cents each. So I was able to plug a lot of holes in my comic collection at a very reasonable price. But to answer the question, it was hard to find too many comics I didn't read. I was just interested in the format. It didn't matter what the subject matter was. And Jeannie, I think you might agree. In the early 70s at Marvel, I don't think Marvel, at that point was considering itself an exclusive superhero publisher. Although they published plenty of them, they were publishing, imitations of other successful things like
westerns, romances.
Yeah, I mean, Night Nurse,
falls right there.
Is something that I don't think would happen today. Although they incorporated her into the Marvel, both the Marvel universe and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I remember seeing a special thanks. Which movie was that? To Gene and
Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange.
Yeah, well, it made sense. Doctor Strange, Night Nurse goes together.
And Gene, I'm curious about you. I mean, what was, maybe through Roy or maybe through yourself, do you remember one of the first comics you ever saw, like that maybe you actually even read, or you just remember?
Oh, you mean as a little kid?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I liked Uncle Scrooge.
How cute.
I like Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge. And as a matter of fact, Roy is actually an avid Uncle Scrooge fan.
Oh, yeah.
Unknown, completely coincidental, but yes, I loved Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck as a little kid. Obviously a certain amount when I was young of like little Lulus and stuff like that. But the big thing, as soon as I was old enough to pick out magazines on my own, was Mad. I loved Mad magazine, and I still have that kind of sensibility about a lot of things.
Yeah. Now it's funny. I don't know if you guys know this, but going back to Spidey Super Stories, like how it was so relatable. It's funny. I don't know if you guys knew, like when Gene Simmons, that's one of the bass player and the singer of Kiss, he had an interesting story because before he got into the band, he was a teacher in East Harlem. And
Gene Klein.
Excuse me?
His name was Gene Klein.
Yeah, Gene Klein at that time. But what he did to try, like none of those kids were listening to him. They called them names and all that stuff. But he brought in an issue of Spider-Man #4. And what he did was he was saying, if you don't want to read, maybe you'd be interested in this. And so he started describing the story, and they all got into it. So I'm just saying, it's kind of like a predecessor to kind of like the importance of Spider-Man and Spidey Super Stories, but like, and the comic books and how important these heroes are to kind of gravitate to people to get. Obviously, there wasn't Spidey Super Stories back then in the 60s, but he used Spider-Man #4 and he got them to read and to understand. Like, you got all these kind of Hispanic, Black, and kids and from East Harlem and all that stuff but he used that and it's funny how Spidey Super Stories comes later, and that's the character they use, of course, the great Spider-Man to to get people to read and get people into it, and like you two having the honors of writing that. So Jim, really quickly, how many issues did you write after Jean?
Well, I did a lot of them. I took over after her and pretty much stayed on till the end, even editing it toward the end. One of the things that was interesting is, people, I think, mistakenly sometimes refer to the comic book companies in the 70s. I can't speak for any others, but I was at Marvel, and maybe Jean could, offer her opinion. They'll say, "Oh, the comic book companies were these boys' clubs," and I don't know. I mean, in the sense of someone who worked there, everyone I knew, would have loved to have more women working there. The idea, why would I want to be at a place where there was nothing but guys? It made no sense to me. And specifically, when I first started working at Marvel, I worked for John Reporton and his assistant, Holly Resnikoff. On Spidey Super Stories, the editor was Anna Jane Hayes, and she had like 6 female assistants that had to approve like every story I ever did, even though on the Marvel side, I worked with John Romita, and even he was assisted by Virginia Romita. So throughout my career, even before I was at Marvel, I worked for Jeanette Kahn as I was a kid at Kids Magazine that she created and was the editor of. So, I always enjoyed working for and with women, and always found that, it was kind of odd that people had that impression of Marvel back then.
Go ahead, Jeannie. Do you have something to say?
Well, Jim alluded to it, and that was the committee. That was the number of children's television workshop people who were involved in every aspect of Spidey Super Stories. Everything had to be run by, and we just happened to.
Can you describe the process?
The name of the head editor, Anna Jane Hayes, but she must have had like at least 3 or 4 more assistants who trailed her around like ducklings. And certainly the whole time that I was working on Spidey Super Stories, it was very much a collaboration and accommodating a lot of the quote committee, and actually going up to CTW at least a couple times a month and going over work, and then their critiques, taking it back and refining it so it was to their standards, especially with their characters. But they also had comments on how Spider-Man might act a little bit more.
So did you have to write
company-ish?
Yeah. Did you have to write, Jeannie, when you first started, did you have to write a script? When you write the script, then you had to present it to them, and then they had to go over it, right? Is that
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
That's kind of how and was it the same time with you, Jim? They did they did the same thing?
Well, if you account for inflation, that must have been the most expensive damn book in the world to produce ever, with 25 different assistants.
Well, also because it didn't really
I don't
have
think they were.
ads.
Yeah.
It really didn't have that whole array of comic book ads that filled out the backs of the books.
Right.
Yeah, I think Anna Jane was working on other projects as well. She wasn't exclusively Spidey Super Stories. But
don't forget, Children's Television Workshop itself, both Electric Company and Sesame Street, were heavily funded through grants and government grants. So to a certain extent, they had to justify a lot of what they were doing. And maybe it was duplicative, maybe it was extra work, but they had to justify everything that they were doing to their government funders.
Yeah, Steve. Good call, Steve. Government spending right there. Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's truly an amazing thing. And the fact is that the impact still being felt today. But for many years, those Spidey Super Stories, when I would go to a convention or something like that, there'd be like a little box on the floor, and it'd be like, these books are 10 cents each. No one reads those. And then slowly but surely, last 15 years, you know, I've had people come in, you know, they're like, oh, I'm a hardcore collector. I have the entire run of Amazing Spider-Man, but I'm missing some issues of Spidey Super Stories. I'm like, what? What do you mean? Yeah, those last couple of issues, I can't find them. They're always, because they were always beaten up. They were always treated terribly.
Well, they were little kids reading.
Yeah, of course. You're
reading them over and over again.
Yes, you're crinkling and you're bending and you're putting in back pockets. Which
and they color it,
cry.
they trace it, they trace it, they color it.
So I again, it's just something that's you know, come full circle. One, in the laudable ideas behind the book, and two, the actual collectability of it. You know, I mean, I can guarantee you that if I had a nice high-grade copy of the Thanos issue, I could sell it within 5 minutes. I could just put it up on the wall and I would say, okay, and I could put whatever price I want on it because they are not there.
Yeah.
They are really, really collectible, you know, because they were treated so badly for so long. I mean,
it's like those early Harveys. I had to get like a Hot Stuff #1. And just getting that into high grade was so hard for me to find. Finding anything high, I found a 5.0 and I gifted it to a friend, a lovely friend. It was so hard to find, and it was great to like give that to her because getting like those type of comics were just the throwaways, you know, like they always, like you said, you give that to the kid in the back seat of that, and then they're just going nuts. But I know we got to wrap up here soon because.
Well, let me throw in one interesting short factoid that I think it was
Go
my
ahead.
good friend Mr. Payne who made me aware of this. I never realized it, but do you realize that Jeannie was the 5th regular writer of an ongoing Spider-Man title, and I was the 6th.
Look, I didn't know that, Jeannie.
Was that scripted, Jeannie?
And not only that, the other factoid was I was the first and only woman writer of Spider-Man until Weezy Simonson came along in the mid-'80s.
Yeah, like 20 years, like 10, 15
So
years.
it was a
20
good
years.
10 years later before there was another woman writing
So
a
it actually went
Spider-Man
Stan
character.
Lee, Roy, Jerry Conway, who came after Jerry, and then Eugene.
Marvin Glenn.
Excuse me?
Marv Wolfman.
Yeah,
Glenn
Marv.
Glenn.
Wolfman.
Yes, Marv, and then Eugenie. Oh my God! That is incredible.
well, wait a minute. Didn't Len come before Marv?
Probably.
Oh God! Thanks you. Thanks, Salicrup. That was like.
I just wanted to make sure that we got it right because, you know, there's people right now and their computer's going.
But look at Salicrup. He says it's so sure, so I have to agree with him. It's Jim Salicrup. Then all of a sudden he's like, I don't know. And it's just like, Jesus, pushes me off the edge. But go ahead.
And then just coincidentally, in the Spidey Super Stories, this is not the Spider-Man canon as we know it, but
Exactly.
there was the first time that a woman put on a Spider-Man suit and called herself Spider-Woman.
Yes, that's
It was
right.
Valerie
And that's
the librarian, and Petey had been careless about where he put his suit, and Valerie the librarian jumped into it and swung into action, and she said, "Well, now I'm Spider-Woman."
look at that. Look at Jeannie. Such a piece of history. Oh, but the 5th writer of Spider-Man. They can't take that away from you.
Although
Jim, what are you gonna do? She has better accolades than you.
But John,
she deserves everything, you know. But
ahead.
I did want to. You mentioned at the beginning there in your introduction about how I'm supposedly the uncredited co-creator of Venom. Ironically, and this does relate to Spidey Super Stories, if you go to Marvel.com and you look up a character called Webman, who first appeared in Spidey Super Stories, they list me and Win Mortimer as the creators. And I got to tell you, Lies. Well, what happened was in Spidey Super Stories, they would list all the credits on the inside front cover, which wasn't a problem. If there was only one writer, then you could assume they wrote all the stories. Right. But if there were multiple writers, which would happen sometimes, they would just list them. And so for some reason, someone arbitrarily picked me as one of the writers, and gave me credit for Webman. He was on a cover where he has the exact same costume as Spider-Man, except the red parts are colored blue and the blue parts are colored red. I believe it was Nick Cuddy who came up with that story, and Webman, who's not getting any. He passed away, unfortunately. And the other writer in that issue, if I'm mistaken about Nick, is Bill Matlow, who, unfortunately is not in good health. But as one of the writers still kicking, I could tell you that I didn't come up with Webman.
Did you have something to say, Jeannie? Did you have something to say?
Well, also it was fun in going up to Children's Television Workshop, being, quote, Muppet adjacent to all the Sesame Street characters. And somehow I got to go to the Muppet Mansion too.
Oh, really?
Which really was like a brownstone owned by Jim Henson that was partly used as a workshop.
In New York.
So, in and around like, a typical brownstone with some elegant furnishings, there would be Muppets.
I got to go there as well. I was trying to develop a Muppets comic strip. One of my friends I went to high school with wound up being someone who built some of the Muppets, and they ultimately chose some other people. I wanted Marie Severin to be the artist on the strip, and she loved the Muppets, but we didn't get to do the comic strip. But then Henson, Associates wound up doing lots of projects with Marvel. I was involved in a few of them. Some of the movies they did. Of course, Marie got to do Muppet Babies, which she absolutely loved, and it was a wonderful series. And got to go to the Muppet Mansion a lot. And I got to, the best thing was meeting Jim Henson and having several meetings with him. And it was like having a meeting with Kermit the Frog. His voice wasn't, he didn't sound exactly like Kermit, but it had that, it was very soft, and he was an incredibly nice guy. And it was a great pleasure to work with them.
Well, okay. We're winding down. First off, we never knew Spidey Super Stories was so controversial, and it had so much other stuff going on there. So, I mean, if you think about it, that's pretty interesting. A lot of this stuff that comes from, let's just say back in the day, kind of like a throwaway issue, like series. But it turns out, it's funny how those happy incidences and that happen that makes it so significant and so highly collectible today. But how I wanted to end this, you guys, I wanted it to end it, especially with you, Jim, and you, Jeannie. If you can remember, one at a time, we'll start with Jim, and then we'll go to Jean. Can you remember a great Christmas story working at Marvel, maybe doing something with Marvel, or maybe bringing something at the house or something? Like, if you can remember like a good Christmas memory and of something that at your time with Marvel, it could be any time. So, Jim, why don't you go first? I would love for fans to know some special little inside thing, maybe a gift you got or something, whatever it could be, a good story that you could have that you can tell some fans that we don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I got to work. I liked Christmas stories, so I was always doing something. On Amazing Spider-Man with Todd McFarlane, there was one issue where I did the sketch for the cover where, for some reason at that point in the continuity, Peter Parker and Mary Jane were living in this really expensive Manhattan apartment building, like the Dakota or something. And the cover I sketched was, them being kicked out.
Oh, yes.
And,
issue 314.
I do remember that one.
And I had it from one angle. Todd twisted around to another angle. I had it from the
In the
side. He did it front on, but Sal Brodsky also edited. Had a department that did all sorts of weird comics for, for example, some would be newspaper inserts. And I remember I did one with Spider-Man where I had the Kingpin dressed up as Santa Claus.
Yeah.
So it was always something I enjoyed doing. With Marvel Age, which was, only 12 issues a year, but I always like to support, independent creators. So for several years in a row, the Christmas issue, I always had Sergio Aragonés do a Gru cover, which Marvel didn't own. Epic was publishing it, but I thought it was how can I resist having a holiday cover by Sergio?
Yeah. Gene?
Okay.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay, this was not a story that anyone wrote. This is a story about someone.
yes.
Okay. Well, way back when, in the early days, in the late 60s or very early 70s, Artie Spiegelman was still an underground cartoonist,
right,
with all the sensibility thereof. And one year, he sent Saul Brodsky a holiday card with an underground character wearing no pants with his you-know-what decorated as a Christmas tree. I mean, one, Saul didn't know whether to laugh or to fall over in shock. Of course, it was passed around to everyone, with everyone appropriately either going or. And I'll always remember that. I mean, and now, of course, he is a well-respected and serious, above serious cartoonist, a graphic artist, graphic novelist. But in the underground days, that was a Christmas memory.
Wow. That's fantastic. Yeah. See, Jeannie, you guys, it's those little stories like that makes this industry so fun. I like it. I actually think for me, I think they're better than the actual comic book stories.
It's the quiet ones like me, sitting at a desk typing, kind of like just had my ears open.
It's great. And you guys had you guys both worked.
Don't believe that quiet one stuff. I won't even mention the photo funnies.
Oh yeah. I was being nice. Jim. I was being nice. Yeah, Jeannie.
I didn't say anything about them.
No, we won't say anything. There's a few of them too, right? There's more than one.
I know nothing.
Yeah. Merry Christmas, Gene.
Happy Hanukkah.
Hey, thank you guys so much for coming here. Yeah. It means so much. I wanted to make a Christmas episode where Spidey Super Stories pertain to kids, and as you know, Christmas in my view is always like a child like wonderment type of holiday because the presents and the kids doing it, and we get that from the comics, and you guys are like created some of these stories that were, like I said, Spidey Super Stories is now a legendary series, and there's no escaping that. So, Steve, any closing words for Jim and G?
It's been a real pleasure. I always love hearing these little nuggets of information. I would have never have thought that, Spiegelman would be doing such a, flamboyant type drawing. and
have you never seen underground comics?
Well, I have, but that's not my expertise. And of course, I wanted to make sure that Webman had the correct creation, so that now our audience have first-hand information and they're correct, and the Wikipedias can now be fixed.
Well, do you realize what how big a deal this is? Like, so much stuff, including your favorite, the Thanos copter, has appeared in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yeah. That it's not impossible that Webman could appear, and I've just given up. All the credit,
or Spider-Woman, Woman.
Danny Fingeroth, everyone.
Danny's watching. Okay, Niall, any closing words for Gene?
I just want to thank Jim and Gene for coming on, and it's always great to hear your stories and talk about this series and what Brighton's been doing and trying to bring this series back to. And again, I don't know how much you guys know, but it's cool to just talk about these stories, things of the past, and having so much fun with it. And I also want to just thank everyone, all the fans of the Pop XP that have been tuning in for over the years. And Merry Christmas, everyone! Happy holidays!
Thank
and
you.
again, Jim and Gene, thank you
you.
so much. And John and Steve, I love you, brothers. I gotta
Thank
tell
you,
you, I
man.
love you guys.
It's been an honor, obviously, being with you guys and doing this and hearing these legend stories. And Jeannie, she's coming out in 225. We're gonna get you in New York, Jeannie. We're gonna get you in New York. You're gonna be. We'll get you. We're gonna get you a little seat there.
Well, isn't it amazing how fast 50 years went by?
Oh God! Look, well, I don't know. Look at Jim. That's a tough 50 years. Look at that. Look at this guy. Nobody's having more fun.
I love Jim's sketches. They're great. Everyone buy them.
Oh, why? Thank you. I'll just add one little thing. One of the things I never expected was how many professional comic book writers have come up to me at conventions and told me that Spidey Super Stories was the first comic book they ever read. Who knew?
Yeah, who knew?
With great power comes great responsibility.
Incredible.
I think I was rather irresponsible.
Lucky enough, there's no smartphone footage from back then, so we're all safe.
Do you have any last words, Gene? Did you want to say something?
No, Niall, you told me not to touch anything. So what do I do?
No, you're fine. I got
You told me not to touch anything.
you. I said, don't touch anything.
You're going to shut off all the power in our house. All right, Steve, get us out of here.
Don't touch a thing. No. We're good.
All right, guys. Boom.
Boom.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.